Good afternoon, folks. Chief Meteorologist Nick Lilia here with your tropical update for May 23rd of 2019. And the official forecast from the National Hurricane Center was released earlier this morning. They're calling for 9 to 15 storms, 4 to 8 of those as hurricanes, and about 2 to 4 as major hurricanes. Of course, this is back in behind the Colorado State forecast, which was released with 13 named storms. They're a little more precise with their forecast. 13, 5, and 2, average being 12, 6, and 3. So generally speaking, between Colorado State forecast and the NOAA forecast, we're looking at about average, maybe a slightly above average season in terms of just the named storms. But in terms of your average for hurricanes and major hurricanes, sitting kind of right in the ballpark of average. That doesn't really change much of anything for us. Of course, it only takes one storm for it to be a bad year for you. So we always say prepare like the one storm is coming your way, even if all we get in the year is one storm. Of course, this year, we already had one storm, so that was Andrea, and that didn't last very long. It got an area of closed circulation with wind at about 40 miles an hour right before it became unfavorable, and then it basically died. So next up on the list is going to be Barry, Chantal, Dorian, Aaron, Ferdinand, Gabrielle. We can go all the way down the list. Umberto is back on the list this year as well. So we've got a list of names. Hopefully your name isn't on here, but if it is, congratulations, you have the chance to be a tropical system this year. In May, we're all the way down here, and not much happens in May in the tropics. We really have to wait until a little bit later in the year as we get through June, July, August, September 10th being the peak, and then we ease back down as we head through the rest of the winter. Interesting to note the little peaks that are in here, all the little ones. You get, of course, the big one, and then a little secondary peak, and then a tertiary peak back there. That generally runs when we've got either a cold front sliding through. Sometimes it has to do with the MJO. But just know that we just passed one little peak, and we had Andrea, kind of coincidental there. Our next little peak shows up as we head through the middle of June. And those, again, tend to be earlier in the season, having to do with the cold fronts that push through the area, and the tail end of the cold front gets kind of like strung out and hangs around. And in fact, that's kind of how we ended up with Andrea. Not the case today. The Gulf of Mexico is nice and clear. Big ridge of high pressure across parts of the southeast. Out into the open Atlantic, we've got an area of mid-level rotation out there. Of course, we still have the stuff that's happening with the Central American Gyre. Come on, slide down for me, map. Doesn't want to do it. We have this stuff going on down to the south with the Central American Gyre, which we're going to have to keep tabs on as we head through the next about 6 to 10 days. As something may or may not develop out of that, we can look out into the open Atlantic, and we still have a fair amount of troughiness. Of course, what we want to see is this to continue. Unfortunately, what ends up happening later in the year is the westerlies kick up as this trough that's out here kind of falls apart, and storms, instead of moving from west to east, actually move from east back off to the west. But for now, yeah, we've got plenty of, we call it shear out here, which would tear any storm apart if it was trying to develop. I mentioned that big ridge of high pressure. You can see it's just parked right over the Gulf of Mexico here on our 500 millibar map, and it's not really moving, thank goodness. If it does move anywhere, it now has it sliding back off to the west. Yesterday and the day before, it actually had it sliding southeast. The day before that and the day before that, it had it sliding back off to the west. So the models right now are still trying to figure out exactly what is going to happen with this big ridge of high pressure out here. But that is going to dictate what happens with the Central American Gyre down off to the south and anything that gets kind of flung our direction with respect to it. If the ridge slides back off to the west, of course, everything goes around a ridge clockwise. That would suppress whatever comes from that Central American Gyre to get shoved back into parts of Central America and Mexico. If it slides off to the southeast, same rules apply. Instead, though, it would pick up whatever's out here and kind of guide it into the Gulf of Mexico and toward us. So we really want that ridge to either stay exactly where it is and stay just as strong as it is, or we want it to slide back off to the southwest. We do not want that thing to push off to the east, because then it kind of opens the door for stuff to slide our direction from the Caribbean. All right. 700 millibar moisture, 850 vorticity map. We'll go over this. That's the grayed out areas saying ain't nothing happening there. And we got a lot of those areas this time of the year. When we look into the greens and the blues, eventually as you get into the yellows, the oranges, and the reds, that's where you talk about low-level areas of circulation associated with the low pressure. The warmer those colors get, the more robust that area of circulation is on the model data. And you can actually see that back in behind the banner here. You see all the oranges and the reds. That's a little area of low pressure. That's not a tropical one, an extratropical one, but nevertheless, you get the idea. Here's your Central American gyre, and not too terribly organized. It does tend to try and get a little better organized as we head through the beginning of next week, and watch what happens. Now, keep in mind, this model's based off the same stuff for the previous one. It's got that big ridge of high pressure up here that kind of sags back off to the southwest. Watch what happens with whatever comes up from this. It's a little better organized, a little better organized. Now it's sliding off to the west, sliding off to the west, sliding off to the west. Good news for us. But if that parks itself off to the east, that would allow whatever's down here to maybe drift into the Gulf of Mexico. That's not a guarantee that we see anything at all out of this. It's just one thing that we've got to keep tabs on over the next couple of days, and wherever that ridge decides it wants to end up is really going to dictate what happens with that bad boy. So anyway, there's your tropical update for May 23rd, 2019. Not a lot happening out there right now, which is good because it is so early in the season. But consider yourself tropically updated.